Hey y'all, I'm Teresa and welcome to my channel. So today's video is going to be a little bit of a heavy one, but I think it's a very important video to make. So I'm not going to be talking about anything triggering in this video, at least I hope not. I'm just going to be talking about specific trigger warnings, like what they are and how we deal with them and all that kind of stuff. So I have always been someone who is 100% okay and believe it's very important to announce trigger warnings in books or movies or media, anything that you are consuming as a person. I think it is important for those who have experienced something triggering in their lives to be able to know before going into something if that has that event in it, because it may affect them quite deeply. So like I said, I've always been for it. I think it's great that people include it. I try to include it in the books that I read. I may forget sometimes, and if that's the case, I'm very sorry for that. But I do try to do my best to include trigger warnings. Now in the past, even though, like I said, I was very much for putting trigger warnings in books or, you know, talking about them when people do reviews and stuff like that, I have never had any trigger warnings for myself. And I never, I guess, truly understood how important they truly are. I mean, I understood like the sense of like, yeah, it's important for these people to know beforehand so they don't have a triggering episode. But I think it's one of those things that's like, if you don't have it yourself, then you won't really know until you experience it yourself, basically. And I wanted to talk about something particular that happened in my life a few months back that now I am needing a trigger warning for. And I don't know, so before I get to that, I want to touch on a few things first. So trigger warnings that I know of are for like sexual content, rape, abuse, child abuse, death of a parent, death of a child, grief, any kind of sexual trauma, anything that has to do along those lines, anytime it has to do with like emotional, physical, spiritual abuse. I'm probably missing a couple, but those are like the big ones that I know about that are definitely important to talk about for people. Maybe like gore and stuff too, some people that might be triggering. Explicit sexual content, even if it's consensual, I think is still important to say if a book has it, because it could affect certain people, and that's all great. And I see people talk about that all the time, and I think that's amazing, and I applaud you for putting those in your books. And for the people who need those trigger warnings, my heart goes out to you, because now I understand what that's like to be triggered, and you know, by something that you weren't expecting to be triggered by, or you weren't expecting this to be in a book that you're reading and enjoyed, and all of a sudden, bam, something happens and you're like, what? Wish I would have known about that earlier, because I could have prepared myself. And the trigger specifically I'm talking about, which I really don't hear much people talking about at all, that's pet death. There are a couple people like Rachel Marie. She has mentioned before that a book has pet death, and I am so grateful that she includes that in her trigger warnings. And I think it's important that more people will do that if the book you have does have pet death in it. I understand that like a lot of books don't, so that's not probably as common of a trigger warning as like something abuse related, but I do think it's very, very important, just as important as these other trigger warnings. Okay, well I guess I'm gonna say that yeah, this might be a trigger warning, because I'm going to tell my story a little bit about what happened with my dog. So if pet death is something that really affects you, I will go ahead and put a timestamp here to skip forward too. So my story is basically I lost my dog in August. He was my child. I do not have children. I have a medical condition that means I may never be able to have children, and so my animals are my children. I know a lot of people say that, but like they are. Like, I mean, it's not just like a superficial thing. Like, no, he was my son. He was my best friend. He was my confidant. He was my everything. Like, I literally lived for that dog. He passed away unexpectedly, very suddenly. It happened in August of 2019. The day before, he had had a biopsy because he had some kind of growth in his mouth that was a bit concerning. The vet did a biopsy of it. Well, it wouldn't stop bleeding. And we took him to the emergency room thinking, okay, maybe they just nicked a nerve or something. It bled like over 24 hours. He would not stop bleeding, and so we took him in just to get a stitch. That's all it was. Thinking, take him home, be annoyed with the vet because they didn't do this in the first place, have to spend all this extra money. That's all it was. Turns out they did some tests because they're like, that's not normal. Found out that he had cancer of his spleen. And for those of you who don't know, that is a death sentence for a dog. I believe cats may get it too. It's a very specific type of cancer that basically it creates tumors full of blood. So it zaps, basically they become very anemic, and the tumors may burst and that can kill them. And so it's a very, very severe illness. It's life expectancy, even if you catch it at like the very, very beginning, is like 20%. And that's with chemo, with surgeries, everything. Most people, even most veterinarians, do not know that this cancer even exists in the animal until, like my case, it's time to put them down, because all of a sudden they go limp or they get really sick out of nowhere. And they seem perfectly healthy before that. So I had to make the choice. Sorry, I know I'm getting emotional. I'm trying to hold it together for the video. I had to make the choice to put him down, put him to sleep, because if he was to go on his own, it wouldn't be pretty. And I couldn't do that to him. I could not allow him to suffer. And the thing was too, he went downhill so fast. Like, he was walking, he walked into the vet, he seemed okay, he was just anxious and a little bit in pain, you know. He couldn't walk out of the vet. We were there for 5 hours and he was unable. We had to take him out on a stretcher. And so I knew that, like, thank God the vet let me take him home, because there was no way I was doing that there at the office. We had a home euthanasia. I was not meaning for this video to be emotional, but you know, that's what triggers are. And I can tell you that this has been a trauma to me, not just a sad thing, not just a hard thing. I have lost many, many pets. I'm 31 years old. I have had pets since I was 8 months old. Like, consistently, I've always had at least one animal in my life since I was 8 months old. So I've experienced a lot of death, a lot of animal death, a lot of pet death. And I've never really needed this before, trigger warnings before. Yes, it would make me sad. There are certain movies I wouldn't watch, like any movie like Marley and Me or whatever, you know, because I know what happened at the end, and I just didn't watch it because I knew it would make me sad. But I never experienced it like I experience it now. He was so much more than just a pet to me. Like I said, he was my child. He was my everything. My literal everything. And him passing the way he passed, he was 10. By the way, he would have been 11 in November of last year. Him passing the way he passed was so extremely traumatic to me, and I've never experienced any pain like that before. I mean, I've recently lost my grandma. I've recently lost an aunt who I was really close to. I've lost a lot of family members lately, and a few friends of the family in the past 2 years. It's been insane. But his death is by far the hardest for me. And I would go as far to say, yes, it is a trauma, a very severe trauma. And I'm in counseling, I'm getting help, so I'm working through it. But I wanted to do this video because I think it's important for people to truly understand triggers. And like I said, I didn't understand it, and I don't think you can truly unless you experience it yourself, what it actually means to be triggered. And I know people joke around about it and like, oh, I'm triggered, that triggers me, but like, no, you don't understand how deep and how severe this can be, and the thoughts and memories and feelings that it can bring up in a person. And to be surprised by it can be very shocking and very damaging. And so yes, I want to make this video, for one, to say, you know, we need to include pet death in our trigger warnings. If we read a book that has pet death, please, please include it. Please do. I recently read one, The Diabolic actually has a pet death scene in it. And it wasn't a very talked about scene, like it wasn't like a huge part of the story. It was talked about and then moved on with quite quickly, but which is fine because it's just the way the story went. Like, I wasn't affected by, I wasn't like mad that they moved on quickly from that. It was just part of the storyline. But the fact that this happened, it did trigger me a lot more than I was expecting, actually. It just brought up my feelings. And yeah, so I think it's very important. Not that I would not have read that book. If I knew that trigger was in there, I would just be prepared for it. I understand some people may not want to read it at all. Like, there are maybe some books that you prefer not to read at all because of certain trigger warnings. Like I mentioned before, there are certain movies, pretty much any movie that involves a dog, I will not watch because it usually ends sad, and I can't handle that. And that was way before this. That was since I was a little kid. I don't like watching sad dog movies. But that being said, you know, there's a lot of books I think I probably would read, even though I know that there is a trigger for me in them. I just would be prepared for it, and I would be expecting it. I would know it would happen, and I would be more able, I think, to deal with the emotions that would come up than if it's just blindsides me like the Diabolic did. I was just like, whoa, okay then. Thanks for letting me experience this all over again. I appreciate it. Nothing against the author at all, nothing against the story. It really did play into the story. It made the story, it really was character development and stuff, so I have no problem with it being in there at all. And like I said before his death, I would not have been triggered by it in the way that I was. I would have been sad, but it wasn't triggering. Now I've experienced something in my life that is triggering. So I guess all this to say is please, please, please put trigger warnings in your videos when you're reviewing books. If you are reviewing books on a blog or on Goodreads, please put trigger warnings, and please include pet death. Like I said, I know there are a lot of books that probably don't include a pet death in them, so if it doesn't, obviously that's fine. But if you do read a book that has that, I would really appreciate it, and I'm sure there are many other people out there who would really appreciate it if you would include that trigger warning. Like I kind of said earlier, I never really knew what it was to be triggered because I never had anything in my life that was triggering until recently. So to those of you who deal with things that are way more prevalent in stuff than pet death, which a lot of the other triggers are way more prevalent in books than pet death, my heart goes out to you because I get it now. And I mean, I might not obviously understand your triggers because I've not experienced that, but I do understand what it means to be triggered and the kind of pain that can come with it. And so, you know, if you push through and you read books that have your triggers in them, props to you. And if you don't, if you say, I can't handle that because it triggers me, props to you too, because you know what you can and cannot handle. And I think that's amazing. And I think you are extremely strong. You know, just because you're not reading it doesn't mean you're not a strong person, because you've survived something that was obviously very, very, very hard and very triggering, very difficult, a traumatic situation. You survived a trauma, and you should be proud of yourself that you are still here today and you are still going, because it's not easy. It's not easy. So whether or not you read triggering books or you don't feel bad about it. You know, you do what you need to do to protect yourself and to stay healthy. And I applaud both ends of the spectrum on that one. You know, I personally, I don't have PTSD. I don't have any sort of like childhood trauma or anything like that, but I do know people who do. Some of my closest friends and relatives experience PTSD and childhood or adult even trauma. So I understand like how important it is to put these in there. So again, please, if you read a book that has something that may be triggering, please just say that it is. Take 2 seconds to be like, trigger warning for abuse, and then move on. That's all you have to say. You don't have to make a big deal out of it. You don't have to be like, oh my gosh, like how am I going to say this, trigger warning, and do I need to talk about it? No, just say trigger warning for this, just be aware and move on. That's all we need. That's all I need. I think that's all a lot of people need, is just to be made aware so that they don't stumble upon it accidentally and be wrecked, because that was me. I was wrecked. Okay guys, I think that's all I have to say. I know this video is kind of short, but actually it's probably not very short at all, but compared to like videos that I'm sure I'll make, it's gonna be one of my shorter ones. But I really appreciate you taking the time to listen to what I have to say. And you know, if you are someone who does not have a trigger in your life, be very thankful for that. But not only that, just please be patient with those of us who do. Please be aware that this is very real and it needs to be handled with respect. So I guess that's all I have to say about this topic, and I really hope that I will see you in the next video. And trust me, it will not be a heavy, sad topic, so we're good there. So I hope to see you in the next video. Bye.